We, of course, added navigation to our page, but one issue is that whilst it does work fine, we get no visual indication of what the currently active route is. It would be nice if this selected tab would change, and that of course is only a CSS thing, because if you check your app component here, you see we got this active class on the list item which determines whether this is marked as active, if this link gets the right CSS classes or not. So it would be nice if we could dynamically set this class. I will remove it from here, and how can we now set it dynamically? Angular gives us a specific directive for this, the router link active directive. And the convenient thing about this directive is you can add it to a wrapping element like we do here to the list item, or also, of course, to the link itself. And it will attach the class you specify in between here, for example, active, so this should be a string, to that element it sits on. Now, active on the link itself wouldn't do anything when using Bootstrap. Here, for this tabs look, we need to add it to the list item, but this of course depends on which package or which CSS code you are using. And here you could specify any class you want, like my active class or whatever that is. So here it is active to make it look nice in Bootstrap's world, and I will add it to all my links here. So now theoretically, all my links should receive this active CSS class once they are clicked or when they are active. So if we have a look at this, it seems to work because we still have home set as our active page, even though we removed this class, this active class we had there before. If I click servers, it gets marked as active too, and the same for users, so this works. But somehow home is always marked as active, so that does not seem to work correctly. What's wrong here? Well, the router link active directive does one thing. It analyzes your currently loaded path and then checks which links lead to a route which uses this path. And by default, it marks an element as active, it adds this CSS class if it contains the path you are on, or if this link is part of the path which is currently loaded. So for the /servers link or the /users link, this is of course the case once we click servers or users. For the /nothing link, which is the first one, the home page, this is always the case. We always have /nothing at the beginning of our path here. So if we are on /users, well, there is this empty path in between, you could say. The same for servers and the same for just home, of course. So the empty path segment is part of all paths. Still, we don't want to have home being marked as active all the time. So to fix this, we can add some configuration to this router link active directive, and I will just split this up all over multiple lines to make this a bit easier to read. So we can add a special configuration to our router link active directive. So on the same element as router link active was added to, we can add router link active options. And this now needs some property binding because we don't just pass a string there. Instead, we pass a JavaScript object, and that would not work without having our squared brackets. So with squared brackets, we can pass anything which will be resolved dynamically, like this JavaScript object. And here we can basically add one important configuration, say exact, and set this to true. So exact is a kind of a reserved property on this object you pass to router link active options, and this will now basically tell Angular only add this router link active class, so this active CSS class in this case, if the exact, the full path is, well, whatever this link leads to. So only if everything is just / and not if it is only part of the path. So with this in place, now you see it still is marked as active on the empty path at the starting page. But if you go to /servers, now only servers is marked as active, because now we fixed this, we changed the default behavior to make sure we only mark this if the full path is, well, whatever we have on our router link. Whoa, we already covered quite some things. We learned how to add routes and how to load them, either by typing it manually into our navigation bar here or by clicking some links. We also learned how to style these links. But what now if we wanted to load a route programmatically? So we don't have a link the user can click, but we finished some operation or the user clicked some button and then we want to trigger the navigation from our TypeScript code. We can do this. Let's say in our home component here, I add a new button to it. And on this button, I simply want to load the server's page. So here, now we could try adding router link, but let's say I want to have a click listener and execute some method because we do something else than just navigating there. I will also add some CSS classes to make this button look nice. So on this click listener, I want to execute onload servers. And here, this method now gets implemented in the home component. And in onload servers, I simply want to navigate to the servers component. So we could, for this example, of course, also use a router link. But let's say here we have some complex calculation, or we reach out to our backend, we store something on the server, and once we are done, now we want to navigate away. To do so, we somehow need to get access to our router, this Angular router, because we need to tell it, hey, please navigate somewhere else. The nice thing is we can inject this router. So let's bind it to a private property, maybe we name it router. And this will be of type router. Router needs to be imported from @Angular router. With this injected, we can use this router here. So this router, and then we get a couple of methods there. One of the most important ones being navigate. Now navigate takes an argument which allows us to, guess what, navigate to a new route. And here a route is defined as an array of the single or the different elements of this new path. So just like here in app component, where I also explained this alternative way of binding router link, binding it to an array, where you could have users for the users part of your path, and then another element for maybe something for the something part of your path. Now you always have to pass such an array when using the navigate method, but in here still the first element is simply the first element or the first segment of your path. So if let's say we want to go to /servers here, we could add /servers here. And as before, this is now an absolute path. You could have a relative one, but here you have to control to what this should be relative to. And I will come back to this. So for now, let's make it an absolute path here. And once we did this, let's check our page here, click this button, and we go to servers. So this is now programmatically routing to a different page. Still, it doesn't reload our page. It does the same as if we clicked a router link. But with this router navigate method, we are able to trigger this programmatically, so trigger this in our code. In the last lecture, we learned how to navigate programmatically. Now I want to also have a look at how we can use relative paths there. So back in our servers component, let's say we have again our reload page link, but this time it's a button here with button primary, and still we might use this approach because we want to do some different things. So reload page, and here I will have my click listener on reload maybe. So if we now go to our TypeScript code, here on reload will be the method which gets triggered. And we already inject this service here. I also want to inject the router. So let's add router here. Make sure to add the import from @Angular router. So we learned that now we could say this router navigate, and now let's add /servers here. If we do this and we save this page and we go to the servers page and click reload, nothing happens. We don't get an error because we are already on this page. Technically, it still reloads the page, but keep in mind it never sends a request, so this reload icon will never spin. But Angular has simply determined that we are on this page, so no further action is needed. Now let's say we remove the slash at the beginning, so we turn this into a relative path, and we still are on the servers component. Keep this in mind. So now if this reloaded and we click this page, we still don't get an error. And now this might be strange because before, when we used the router link, you saw that we did get an error because it would try to add servers to the end of this path. And of course, this route now doesn't exist. So why does it work fine if we use the navigate method? Because unlike the router link, the navigate method doesn't know on which route you're currently on, so to say. The router link always knows in which component it sits, in which component's template, and therefore it knows what the currently loaded route is. Now you could argue that here we also call this inside of the component TypeScript code, so it could determine where it is in, but it's just not how it works. So to tell this where we currently are in, we have to pass a second argument to the navigate method, which is a JavaScript object, and here we can configure this navigation action. Now, I will come back to this later because there are more things we can add, but one configuration is the relative to property here. Here we define relative to which route this link should be loaded, and by default this is always the root domain, which is why we didn't get an error for this server's path. Here we have to give a route though, so we don't pass a string here. Instead, the route is something we can inject here too. We can get the currently active route by injecting route, which is of type activated route, and make sure to import activated route from the @AngularRouter package too. Now, activated route, like the name implies, simply injects the currently active route. So for the component you loaded, this will be the route which loaded this component. And the route simply is kind of a complex JavaScript object which keeps a lot of meta information about the currently active route. Now we can set this as a value, so this route, this injected route, for the relative to property. And now with that extra piece of information, Angular knows what our currently active route is. And theoretically, you could also set this to some other route, which you would have to get by some way. So here, we're telling it, now our currently active route is this activated route. So relative to this route, you should navigate. And then it will simply resolve all the relative paths you might have here relative to this route. So if this change in place, if we now click this button again, now we broke the app, because now it again tries to find servers/service, which doesn't exist. So great, we broke the app. But with that, you should understand how you can work with relative paths in the navigate method. You define relative to what this path should be loaded. The default is the root URL. That might be the behavior you're looking for. It might not be the behavior you're looking for. You can change it with this extra JavaScript object, second argument to the navigate method, where you have the relative to property you can set to the route you want to navigate relative to. For now, I will simply comment this out to disable this not working button and still keep the code in this example project.